Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special BSME webinar, How to Win a BSME Award. And I'm very pleased to be joined by three other members of the BSME committee. So I'm Gideon Spanier. I'm the chair of the BSME for 2024 and the UK editor-in-chief of Campaign. And I'm going to welcome Laurence, Hattie, and Sophie. And why don't each of you just give us your full name and job title. So, Laurence.
Sure thing. I'm Laurence Mozafari. I'm editor-in-chief of Digital Spy, and I've been on the BSME committee for about three or 4 years now.
Hattie.
Hi everyone, I'm Hattie Brett, the editor-in-chief of Grazia, and I have been on the BSME committee for 5 years now.
All right, and Sophie.
Hi, I'm Sophie-Marie Odum, editor of Motability's lifestyle magazine, and I'm the newest member. I've been on the panel and the committee for, I think, 5 months or 6 months. So, yeah.
Fantastic. So they've all won awards. They have all been judges. So we're in very good hands. So I'm just going to bring up a little screen, a slide, so you can sort of see. I'll just go back to the beginning here. We're going to have the three panelists talk with me about how to win an award. You can see a picture because Edward Enninful, who was the editor-in-chief of British Vogue, was the star of last year's awards. He picked up 2 awards, including the Mark Boxer Award for Outstanding Contribution. And he's pictured with Naomi Campbell, who actually presented that award to him and gave a great speech. So we wanted to remind you, and you can see all of the details at bsme.com/awards. These awards really, there's an award and a category for every type of magazine brand: consumer, B2B, custom publishing, and independence. And the main BSME awards actually take place in November. And the key things for you to know, with the deadline approaching 31st of July, we've got Editor of the Year, but also Art Director of the Year, Columnist of the Year, Cover of the Year. And it's really important that we want to celebrate the fast growing and changing digital artwork and design. So that's a new type of award we've got. There's also a DE&I Leadership Award. Your 4th entry, if your brand makes 4 entries, is free, and your 5th gets 50% discount. So we're going to talk first about how to write an entry, then what the judges look for, and we're going to focus on the criteria, and then some do's and don'ts and some audience questions. So let us start with Laurence. Laurence, can you give us 3 tips on writing a winning entry? What have you found that works?
Sure thing. So I've been lucky enough to win, I think it's like 3 or 4 awards across kind of the Rising Star Talent Awards end of the BSME, as well as the Editors Awards. I've had pretty similar strategies across all of them for how I structure them. I quite like to bullet point things, make it very succinct, very easy to read, and kind of try and hit a key point with every single bullet. Makes it quicker for the judges to read, easier to consume, and I guess where as I've found in later years when I've come to judge, if you've got that easy evidence in front of you to refer back to, it can make it more straightforward. I think off the back of that, having a stat which helps back up each of your points is really helpful. Probably not always possible for print, but I think where you can, have a strong anecdote or a quote or a stat to focus on, I think that really, really helps. I quite like to focus on percentage increases year on year, because it kind of show that growth and show that shift, because you have an individual stat of, I don't know, this article had so many readers. That's fine in isolation, but without a yardstick to measure it against, it's hard for judges that are new to your brand to know. And I'd say, simple one, but make full use of the word count and make sure you tick off every bit of criteria in the entry form. And I think you'll hear that a lot today. But yeah, make the most of the word count and really, really focus in on those entry criteria, I'd say.
You've got 500 words, so yeah, be clear and focused. Hattie, a few tips from you?
Yes, I think Laurence has really ended there with my first one. So we come full circle, which is really pay attention to the criteria. look at that as you're writing your entry, and before you submit it, make sure you have actually ticked off what the judges are looking for in their criteria, because trust me, we have all been in situations as judges where there's been a tiebreaker, there's been a really tense discussion between judges about who should win, and that is one of the things that we return to in those kind of scenarios, to really look at who has answered the criteria on the website or in the awards information that you can get from the BSME. So really pay attention to that. My second one, again, probably sounds obvious, but is to really give some context as to who your audience is and your place in the market. I think it should be really crystal clear to judges who you're writing for, who you're creating content for, and why it works for that specific audience. And my third picks up again on a Laurence point, but the stats really do help back up your story. I think a really compelling entry tells a story of innovation and success and reinvention, and it does it in a way that's very accessible for the judge, but definitely clear, compelling stats that show that growth, that demonstrate that year-on-year performance are super important.
Sophie, you just recently, your brand won a BSME Talent Award and you've joined the committee, so you started to see the judging process. A couple of tips from you?
Very similar. Again, with stats, I think as well as including it in the written entry, it's also a really good idea to include it in supporting materials. If you can take a screenshot of the CMS just to show the growth, I think that's really strong as well. Tell us why you stand out from other editors or other titles. I know it sounds really obvious, but sometimes that can be not hammered home enough. So really go hard on that. And it sounds simple, but don't rush. Take time writing the entry so you're sure that you've included everything you want the judges to know and to consider.
Very good. Okay, so I think let's move on to the awards criteria. And the reason is, I think when we're thinking about these awards, and as I said, there's editor, there's columnist, and the art director as the key ones. I'm just going to bring them up on the screen for a second, the actual criteria. Now, this is available on the bsme.com awards section, where you look up the criteria. So none of this is a secret, but it's very, very important as a judge when you're looking at this. So try and give us a sense of how you think as a judge. You've already mentioned it, Hattie, but if we start with Editor of the Year, I mean, these are some pretty simple, actually, criteria, but you've got to answer all 5, right? You can't just answer 4.
Yeah, exactly. I would say go through them. Sorry, I was on mute. We're still doing that. But exactly that. I think go through all of them and give each of them equal weight and think about how you can incorporate them into your entry. And also drill down into what that means. And there are some further descriptions, I believe, on the BSME website. So actually, if leadership is about your team, how big is your team? How many people are in it? Are they staff members? Are they freelancers? How are you motivating that team and how are you leading that team? What new things have you introduced to your team? I remember reading a really brilliant entry one year where they talked about giving their team a day to immerse themselves in their market. And I thought that was a really brilliant example of kind of innovative leadership, thought leadership.
Grazia's won Columnist of the Year. I'm sure as editor you like to support your columnists. Give us a little insight in what you think makes a good columnist category entry.
Yeah, one of my do's was going to be do remember to enter the awards and enter those people around you. I think it's a really brilliant thing for your team to be recognized. And, in a world where work's tough, isn't it? And we're all working longer hours, doing more. Actually, it's a really nice way to recognize that you really value someone on your team. So that's how I think about entering people into awards. Columnist, Polly Vernon, our brilliant columnist who's been with us for a number of years, has won this award twice. I think what I'm thinking about when I'm writing that entry with her is, again, how can we demonstrate that she really galvanizes the audience. So we look at readers' letters that have come in and readers' emails and the reaction to her columns on social, how engaging they can be on those platforms. And we give evidence that actually her columns do provoke reaction from our audience because she gets our audience absolutely bang on. And we also look at the supporting material. So have we got a range of topics that she's talking about? Something light, something serious, something in between? Are we showing the breadth of her columns in that supporting material?
Yeah, great. Sophie, I'm going to ask you same question, what about meeting the judging criteria? And I'm going to ask as a second part about art, because I think you've been recognized for your covers. So, the importance of art direction as well. But let's start with what you look for when you're a judge. What's going to impress you?
I mean, every mention of the judging criteria, they all hold equal weight. But I think, something I particularly look for, especially with diversity and inclusion being such a big thing for me, is the impact of the work that you're doing and the wider impact, whether that be an internal impact that you've had or within the industry or to your readership. And again, like I said before, with stats and feedback, always provide that as evidence so we can see. But yeah, definitely impact is something I personally look for.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that resonates a lot with the committee. We mentioned the DE&I Leadership Award, but I think it should be essential to your everyday work, but making sure you tell that. And just a word on art direction and so on. It's maybe an easy thing to say, but the reason we have these awards is because art direction really matters to magazine media. And I guess a way of asking that as a judge is why do what is it would stand out for you in the same way that when you're creating covers and other artwork?
It's art that stands out without even needing a headline, that's strong enough without a headline. The headline supports it, definitely, of course, but it's a striking image that just tells a story on its own. And then the headline is, it complements it. But it has to be a striking image or tells a story or, like I said, has a wider impact in the story that it's trying to tell. But yeah, definitely striking to look at.
Good. And I would just add that, when you see in these judging criteria, in editor of the year, it's got innovation. But I think in art director, where it says creativity, and leadership, we're definitely looking and are impressed by art directors who are helping to push the boundaries for their brand. It's a really exciting time, especially in digital, which is one of the reasons why we've got Outstanding Piece of Digital Art and Design, a new award. And I think we're really trying to encourage brands and editors to think, well, how are you actually helping your brand come alive in digital in beautiful and pleasing ways? Laurence, we've talked a lot about this already, but in terms of what excites you as a judge when you come across an entry, is it simply that they ticked all the criteria?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think that's the core tenets you want to hear, definitely. Thinking back to the different times I've judged, there's been some times where there's been good stats, there's been well-balanced entries, but you can also have kind of very unusual entries with exceptional circumstances that could have only happened in that year. And I think that's probably the other thing I drew on where, we're all journalists, we're all creatives. I think the power of a story can also be a really other important thing to fold in. So is there a reason why it should be this year versus any other year, and why your brand this year in this role versus any other year? Because I think sometimes that can be, the X factor that outweighs other things, and I think can definitely, really compel the judging committee together to make a unanimous decision. But yeah, the criteria are really important. I think obviously I spoke about stats, but I think to be more specific, it's about, tangible things like dwell time, active users, completion rates and subscribers. There's going to be certain metrics which are more important to your brand than others, I think. And I guess, I think we've mentioned this already, but where we're trying to give equal weight to the different criteria if you do feel a bit light on them, I wouldn't say just ignore it altogether. Like, try and address it in some way, in the best way that you can. And with real world impact as well, I think that's been particularly useful where I've been judging in the kind of more B2B categories, where it's less perhaps about creative writing, it's more about strength of exclusives and really knowing your patch. And I think that real world impact can also help judge categories which are very, very tight, very lean, very, very hard to separate them out, essentially. So I think real world impact can't be understated across all the categories for what it can do.
So we're going to get to audience questions in a minute, and you can ask them through the chat. We've had some in advance. One thing, Laurence, you said before, but I guess I could ask this to all of you, is don't undersell yourself. When I talk to some people about awards, they're understandably modest. They almost hate the idea of having to put themselves forward. Obviously, you can put your art director or columnist forward if you're an editor. So what about, Hattie, do you ever look at an entry and go, oh, I wish they were selling themselves harder almost? They've been too modest.
Yes, I definitely do. I think it can feel tricky, uncomfortable writing an entry about yourself, but actually this is your opportunity to put yourself forward. It's your chance to have your work celebrated and recognized. And if you get nominated and you're shortlisted and you're in the room, to be in the room with a bunch of really interesting people from a subsection of markets outside of your own who you can learn from and you can engage with and who will come and help your career. Plus, the awards are really fun. I think we don't say that enough as well. It's a fun night out that really celebrates our industry. And I think at a time when things are tough, that's really important to kind of say, actually, look at this amazing work that is being done across a range of disciplines, and we can all learn from that. I think every time I judge, I have a new idea or new inspiration. I think it's brilliant to see people's work. So shout about it and put yourself forward.
Okay, good. Now, let's get on to some questions we've had in advance. This is an interesting question from Michelle Johnson from Vantage Publications. How do you approach entering if your publication covers multiple categories? Now, I know, Hattie, you haven't answered this, but I'm going to start with Sophie, because you did enter multiple categories in the BSME Awards last year. Tell us, what was your thinking about that? And, you can see all of the different categories for Editor of the Year on the website. So, yeah. You're mute, I think.
Sorry, I did it. Why did I do that? Because you're just sort of spreading your chances, aren't you? So if you might not get one, you might get the other. And also because of the area that lifestyle sits in, it's health and fitness, but it's also, I've forgotten the other category I entered, but it also fits into that category quite nicely. So I guess there's a tip in there, really. You might think that you only fit into one category, but if you really think about it, it could probably be applicable to another category. And yeah, why not enter more than one?
Yes. Well, I guess one obvious question would be, would you submit the same entry or would you tailor it? I'm assuming.
Yeah. I would definitely suggest tailoring it, because again, you need to play to the strengths of each category and make sure you're following the criteria of each category as well.
Hattie, you've been a chair of the BSME, and obviously you know how to win. What's your advice about entering multiple categories as an editor, or an art director for that matter?
Yeah, I think as we've said, if you have the budget and you can afford to enter multiple categories, I think be strategic about it. And if you really have as your aim, which we all obviously want you to have, because we wouldn't be on this call if we didn't, to win a BSME award, look at the people that have won in those categories before, look at who was shortlisted and who won out of that shortlist, and try and work out what are your realistic chances against those people. Often people enter year after year. Where do you think you would naturally fit within that category of people, and where do you have the best chance of winning? And I think there is no harm in being quite strategic about it. I think having judged BSMEs for a number of years, you can see the companies that are very good at doing that and being very strategic about how they do it. The other thing I'd think about is don't leave your entry until the last minute. Think about it throughout the year. And actually, if you really want to win a BSME, we're here telling you these are the criteria that we're looking for. Think about, as you go through the year, what are the points that obviously fit with your brand OKRs and your objectives on a brand. Don't just launch a campaign to win a BSME award. You should be doing that because it's right for your brand. But if you know that that's the kind of thing that's really going to form the cornerstone of your BSME entry, then as you're doing that campaign, take screenshots of your stats, build that story then, so that when it comes to write your entry, you've already kind of written it and you've got your supporting material.
Okay, yeah, I think that's good advice. And I do think it's motivating to think, how do I produce award-worthy journalism, in theory, every day of the week, but certainly with special projects and things like that. It's a good idea. And someone once talked to me about having a victory log, keeping up your wins. But I think we've got another question, which is a bit similar along the lines of, what's your advice if you're a niche publication? Now, this comes from Jennifer Newton, and the only thing I would say is that to an extent all magazines cover a niche. But Laurence, why don't I throw it to you? Any advice if you're a niche publication?
I guess it probably tracks back to Hattie's point earlier about contextualizing the audience. Not everyone that judges all the awards is going to be an expert in every field, and we kind of make a big point to make sure that people that are in competing fields aren't judging. Like, so I'm not judging entertainment, for instance. So I'd say contextualize the audience. Real world impact would really matter. But yeah, I think it's all about context, really. I wouldn't let that put you off from entering. I think we do a lot of work to champion independent publications. And also, I think the beauty of this committee and doing some of the judging is sometimes you happen across I happened across a board game magazine from judging a few years ago that was like really high end, really bespoke, like a real work of passion, and it was so fantastically done. And I think it ended up winning an award. And I think the nicheness, or sort of the more niche it is, shouldn't be off-putting. And I think to your point, Gideon, it can be the difference sometimes in making you look in a completely different light. Like, wow, they've made board games completely appeal to me, and it's not something I'd ever thought of before. So you're really doing your job well. So yeah, contextualize the audience is the main thing, I'd say.
Sophie, I'm guessing however you regard your title, you'd encourage niche publications.
Yes,
whatever that means, right?
Yeah, exactly what Laurence said. It's all about, contextualizing the audience and just making sure we understand the backstory, and then from that we can judge. We all don't know every subject.
And I have to say, as a judge, it's a great learning process. You always learn new things. So we really value the judging experience. Now, I'm just looking for, we've got sort of two questions related to sort of independence. So the first comes from Juliet Ricks from Tonic Magazine Art, saying, how do you decide the specialist category when there's some large publications? And also, I think for independents, well, we define independent publications as ones with a turnover under £10 million. So you might have what sounds like a big brand, but it still actually doesn't necessarily have a huge turnover as a publication. Kimberly Nugent asks, can you discuss some of the new categories, and asks what is considered an independent publication? Well, I think I've mentioned that. And then independent cover of the year. Just to say on that, we do feel that independent titles sometimes don't have the resources of a huge brand, and therefore having the cover of the year for independents gives them a chance to stand out in a different kind of way, even though, of course, you can still enter the consumer one and the B2B one. One other thing, we dropped digital cover of the year this year because we feel like a cover is a cover, whereas the new outstanding piece of digital art and design is very much around the idea that it takes great creativity to produce something which might be multi-channel, multi-format, and there are plenty of magazine brands now that don't have print, and really they are trying to express something fantastic, a pinnacle of their brand, a peak moment through digital art and design. And that's what the new award is meant to cover. Let's move on to another question. Now, this sounds like a funny question because I think we've answered it already. How much does stats matter? Now, do you all think stats matter? I mean, the narrative matters a lot, doesn't it? I mean, Laurence, when you said bullet points, the one thing I thought was you don't want to bombard the judge with so many stats. You haven't got an idea what their arc is. So tell me, whoever wants to pick up, how do you balance the storytelling, 500 words, with the stats within it, and whether because there is an art to this, right?
I could probably jump in there. I think, yeah, I'm not envisaging 50 stats just in bullet points like a spreadsheet, but I guess the way we tend to work, we have monthly reporting and wrap-ups that we do throughout the year, and we'll do wash-ups on projects. So we're lucky to kind of have those stats to hand throughout the year, and it makes it a bit easier to reflect when you look back in the last 12 months. I think it's, write it top to bottom as you would do normally, get the story in there, then you cut it back from there and work into it. And sometimes there'll naturally be a point where you can bracket in some stats that feed into it. Sometimes you might have to feel like, okay, this is a really great creative point. How do I apply a stat to it? Not everything will do. And I think a lot of the time, other judges I've been in with haven't, especially independent freelance ones, haven't been as focused on stats. I think it's definitely part of the mix. I think not having it in there at all feels like an omission. Only focusing on them would be too far. So I think it's that balance between a nice arc and a story and creativity and impact and why this year, as well as stats where you can thread them in. And I think the main thing is, have the stat mean something. Is it a year-on-year increase? Is it a revenue increase? I think the board game magazine I referenced earlier, I think they had a really interesting point where they sort of crowdfunded initially, built up enough interest to sort of prove the business case, and then launched it, and then had like Patreon type subscribers that had paid for it, and then launched it as a mail order. So there was real evidence there of, starting it from the beginning, believing in the idea, proving the funding, and then like establishing a sort of funding base. And it was a print magazine, and I don't believe there wasn't a digital element to it, but they had, the number of subscribers, the amount they've managed to raise, the amount of issues they sold, having to order more for the print run and stuff. So just because it's not digital doesn't mean that there's probably not figures you can put alongside it. And it just helps when you come to that crunch point where you're really stuck on one between two candidates. It can kind of make that bit of difference, I think.
Okay, good. And now can I bring in another question from Jessica Prupas? Can you talk about branded content? Now, custom publishing is important. What are you looking for there? Hattie, can I throw that to you? And it may be even interesting whether stats matter more in branded content.
I would say that should be definitely part of your entry. I think the commerciality of your business is important. Whilst we're judging editors on creativity and innovation and leadership, we are also looking at how successful as a business your brand has been. So the commercial element, I think, is an important one to throw in there for sure.
Good. Okay. I'm going to say that we've been doing really well on time, and I think I'd like to, move towards wrapping up. I'm going to give you some sort of tips as some takeaways at the end. But there's a question here from Curtis Muldrich from Bauer. What are the universal qualities you look for, regardless of the type of publication? And I think that is a broad question. They go on to ask things like team structure, workflow. What do winners often have in common? That is an interesting question. Sophie, do you want to take it first? What do you think winning entries often have in common?
Well, that's a hard one because I only judged one awards, but
Well, I'm going to go first then. I think that what you said earlier, Sophie, they've got to stand out. They've got to have something where you feel like that this brand made an impact, and to pick up on what Laurence said, that somehow it's your year. And I certainly think that strong narrative with examples is almost always the case. And I do think, as Hattie was saying about columnists, it also matters there. You know, why was it this year the columnists made an impact? Often they're not new; they've been doing it for a while, but somehow they really stood out this year. Laurence, was there any universal qualities you see?
There's some entries you can see where people are really going the extra mile, like they're putting in time mentoring talent, or they're, I guess, going above and beyond, that kind of classic phrase. They're doing things which you might not necessarily expect from the role. They're sort of ideating new things and launching new kinds of business. That can kind of happen sometimes. I think to your point about it being their year, obviously we had some big wins with Computer Weekly after the post office scandal reports, and obviously they've been covering that for years, as we spoke about in the BSME event. But it really felt, you know, with the ITV documentary, all the stories they continued to cover this year, it was a really strong entry. Plus there was a kind of the impact culturally and politically that kind of that pushed over the edge. So I think, yeah, why this year, I think, is the main thing I'd focus on. With the winners, I think it's going above and beyond, and there's not really a bullet point list for that, but everybody will know individually in their teams. I think some teams, you know, unfortunately are smaller than others now. So I think adding that context for how big is that team, because you could be doing really impressive things in a bigger team where you've got more resource, whereas if you're doing the same amount or as much with a much smaller team, then that can kind of help contextualize again that you're still doing so much output or delivering so much with less resource. So yeah, I think above and beyond candidates are the ones that normally go through, I think.
Okay, we're suddenly getting more questions, so thanks to everyone who's submitting them. Okay, to a top consumer title, Hattie, can you give tips on entries for B2B magazines? And also, I'm going to bring in Sophie afterwards on if you're membership only. So any tips on B2B? Because, yeah.
I mean, I actually think some of the things that have already been said on this call are worth reiterating here. I definitely think, to Laurence's point, there are some, we are careful, or the BSME are careful about who judges what categories, but it is definitely worth spelling out who your audience is, what role you play for that audience in your entry, so that the judges are really clear on what your remit is. And that can mean audience, it can mean structure of the team, it can mean platforms that you operate on and whether they are subscription only. Be very specific about that so that it's really clear when we're judging what the metrics of success have been. And I do think the same point's been made before, but a lot of the B2B entries I have judged are very much about real world impact, and you actually see that far more, I think, in the B2B categories than you do the consumer categories, where it is really clear that this is a magazine brand that has affected real change for its audience and had a purpose and meaningful year.
Yeah, I can see Sophie nodding there.
I was going to say impact and influence and stats, backing it up with stats for sure, or reader feedback, because a lot of B2B magazines do have like a reader panel or an expert panel that they refer to bounce ideas off, or to do product tests or whatever it may be. Get that feedback, get those stats, and include that as well, because otherwise, how will the judges know that whatever it is you're entering has worked and had an influence or impact?
Yeah, and I'm assuming, given that you know a lot about membership titles, editing a membership title means the same skill, in some ways more skill than a consumer title. Was that fair?
Yes, exactly that, because you have to keep the reader, because it is a membership benefit or a customer magazine. So that is your core and only audience. And for lifestyle, we've branched out beyond just a customer magazine, but that's a story in itself, how we've created a brand. So if you're entering for a B2B title, have you been able to do that? Have you been able to step over and above and beyond just the customer base and reach out to the wider audience? And if so, how? Yeah, that's a story in itself.
Yeah, I agree. And someone has asked, could a not-for-profit magazine enter, and would that come under independent? Well, yes, definitely not-for-profit could enter, and it could, if you make the case why, we've had a number in both independent and specialist in the past. So, yes, you know, absolutely, we encourage you to enter. I should also say that, you know, can freelancers enter? Yes, I think it all depends a bit on the definition. But, you know, for example, for columnists, I think we ask normally to have the support of the editor. But if you've got any questions on that, contact the BSME. And the I think probably, I'm just looking to see if there's any other question before we wrap up. I think here's this last one. So any of you can pick up on this. Can you recall an entry that just blew you away, and you thought, oh, I'm going to use this strategy for my award entry next time? You don't have to be specific about the title, but anything where you went, wow, that is a pretty clever or just admirable way of telling the story.
I think there's been a few where to speak to the exceptional circumstances. I think there was once an instance where somebody had to step up into like an editor type role with very, very short notice. It was a new launch, a new rebrand due to exceptional personal circumstances, I think. And there was so much that they hit off with all the criteria, but I think also it was so exceptional. It went back to that point of why this year. I think in the year after they might have stepped back down, it was just it felt exceptional and kind of also, I guess, tied into the real humanity of the job and the team working together and really pitching in, and that really struck me. I think on a very, very different note, the board game one stuck with me, I think, because it was unique and so independent and so self-funded, and had such proof of it doing so well and was such a quality product, and wasn't something I'd be expecting to come away, so it stuck with me. And I think they're still on my shelf somewhere. So yeah, I think that those kind of speak to probably more exceptional things that have been outside of the criteria that have had that X factor, I think.
Well, we could go on. I'm going to finish with some just tips, because I thought, you know, we've had some brilliant, you know, insights from three brilliant people here who know what it takes to win and enjoy the judging. We love judging. I just want to say that to everyone. You know, we really value your entries. So here's some 9 tips, which you know, we'll also put on the BSME website. You know, do your revision, pick your best journalism. Read the criteria. I think you know this. It is how the judges score. We score each of the criteria equally. So it's not a secret. That's how we score. You know, make an effort and plan, tell your story well, prove your case with evidence and data, a little context. As Hattie said, not everyone knows about your brand, so explain it simply. How are you contributing more broadly? I think this could be in lots of ways. We know about things like DE&I. That's something the committee values a lot. But it could be you're also helping with events, other kinds of activities that your brand is doing. That matters a lot. Something we haven't mentioned, an endorsement. You know, someone in your sort of your world, that could be a sort of key person within your audience externally who gives a supportive quote. That can help. And the last thing, I think it's come up already, check your entry, you know, read it carefully. Most editors are intolerant of spelling errors and bad language and grammar. So don't disappoint on that score. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone. There are 2 weeks to enter. The deadline is the 31st of July, but the BSME are friendly and we will do our best to extend if needed. I know it's unheard of for journalists to file late, but we are very understanding, and Julia, David, and all the BSME team will do everything they can. admin@bsme.com. The awards themselves will take place in November. We will give more details nearer the time, but it's always a fantastic evening. Can't always promise a supermodel, but we'll do our best to make sure it's got enough glamour. So my final task is to say thank you to Sophie, Laurence, and Hattie. Thanks for all of your tips.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Good luck with your entries.
And I hope everyone enters, and obviously we'd like you all to win. So hopefully our tips will help. Thanks so much. BSME.com, by the way, just to check all the stuff about the awards and criteria. Thanks again. Thanks for watching.
Bye.